The morning air in the Sierra Nevada foothills carries a biting chill, but the cold that settled over Cabin 28 was unnatural. In April 1981, a rusted door swung open to reveal a tableau of staggering violence that would forever scar Plumas County. Blood soaked the floorboards and pooled beneath the furniture. 3 lives had been extinguished with calculated brutality in a space barely large enough to hold a family gathering. The victims were bound with electrical wire and medical tape, their final moments defined by absolute terror. Investigators stepping across the threshold were met with a chaotic matrix of physical trauma. Furniture was overturned, walls were gouged, and the metallic scent of copper hung heavy. Yet, amid this overwhelming sensory assault, the most crucial details lay hidden in the negative space. The story of the Keddie Cabin murders is about what was methodically taken away. To understand the magnitude of the investigative failure, one must look at the immediate aftermath. The initial response by local law enforcement was a masterclass in catastrophic evidence handling. First responders trampled through the blood-slicked living room, inadvertently destroying the fragile forensic narrative. Boot prints overlapped, cross-contaminating the scene and blurring the lines between the killers and the cops. The perimeter was little more than a suggestion, leaving vital clues vulnerable. This lack of protocol created an irreversible gap that would haunt detectives for decades. A compromised crime scene is a forensic black hole, swallowing data that can never be retrieved. Blood spatter patterns, which should have mapped the exact movements of the attackers, were compromised by careless foot traffic. The initial police interviews were conducted in a frantic blur, failing to lock down timelines or secure alibis while the adrenaline was fresh. Witnesses were allowed to mingle, their testimonies bleeding together. The failure to isolate neighboring cabins meant the killers could slip through the porous perimeter, wash their hands, and watch the chaos unfold. Under the harsh lights of the medical examiner facility, the true mechanics of the slaughter emerged. Extensive blunt force trauma to the victims' skulls revealed uniform fractures. Measurements indicated a curved striking surface and dual puncture wounds consistent with a heavy forged tool. While knives inflicted secondary trauma, the primary instrument of death was missing. The red thread connecting these wounds was a single, absent claw hammer. This intimate weapon would have covered the attacker in high-velocity spatter, yet it was successfully smuggled out of Cabin 28, past sleeping children, and into the dark woods. The focus shifted to men in adjacent cabins with histories of violence. The psychological profile suggested 2 perpetrators, one to control the environment, another to execute the overwhelming force required to subdue 3 active targets. During interrogations, detectives noted rehearsed alibis and timeline inconsistencies, but without the missing hammer or untainted blood evidence, police lacked the physical leverage to break them. The killers knew it was a frustrating game of verbal chess. 3 years later, the tragedy expanded. Deep in the Plumas National Forest, nearly 30 miles from the resort, the skeletal remains of the youngest vanished victim were unearthed. The remote location indicated profound familiarity with Sierra Nevada logging roads. Though exposed to the elements, the bone matrix retained the unmistakable signature of the same blunt force trauma. Transporting a victim across county lines under the cover of darkness required a vehicle, a secure route, and a terrifying level of logistical coordination. Decades slipped by, and the Keddie murders became a toxic legacy for local law enforcement. Inside the dusty department archives, boxes of case files documented a staggering array of missed opportunities.
A deep dive into these historical records reveals a systemic failure regarding evidence handling that went far beyond the initial contamination. Anonymous letters pointing directly to the primary suspects were logged and promptly forgotten. Recorded confessions made to third parties were buried under bureaucratic red tape. The files read less like an active investigation and more like a chronicle of institutional paralysis. The original detectives, overwhelmed by the sheer brutality of the crime, developed tunnel vision. They dismissed viable leads that contradicted their initial theories, leaving a trail of unexamined forensic data decaying in manila folders. The missing claw hammer, the phantom weapon that should have been the focal point of every search warrant, was relegated to a mere footnote in the ledger. When a new generation of investigators reopened the boxes, the true magnitude of the forensic gap became clear.
Shielded from the chaos of the original crime scene, analysts applied modern science to historical mistakes. They digitized the crime scene photographs, utilizing advanced enhancement software to map the blood spatter trampled by careless boots. This digital reconstruction stripped away the noise. The enhanced images confirmed the medical examiner's decades-old suspicion. The arc of the blood cast off on the ceiling perfectly matched the swing radius of a standard framing hammer. Modern analysis of the wire used to bind the victims also revealed distinct tool marks. The killers used a specific wire cutter, leaving microscopic striations on the copper ends. Like a fingerprint, these marks wait to be matched. The tragedy is that these physical tools were never seized during the crucial window in April 1981. The suspects walked away, taking their lethal instruments with them. A forensic analysis of the case serves as a dark masterclass in how a solvable homicide devolves into an impenetrable mystery. The science was always there, waiting in the bone fractures, but the chain of custody was broken. Every cold case is a puzzle with missing pieces, but Keddie is a puzzle where the pieces were actively swept off the table. Investigators had the bodies, the suspects, and the motive. What they lacked was the discipline to protect the crime scene's silent witnesses. The blunt force injuries pointed directly to a claw hammer. Without the weapon, the case paralyzed. Consider the primary suspects, men who walked Plumas County with the swagger of untouchables. Following the murders, their behavior exhibited the classic hallmarks of psychopathic decompression. They abruptly relocated, abandoning jobs and severing community ties. When questioned years later, their narrative shifted to aggressive denial. They leveraged the police department's blunders as a shield against the compromised forensic record. This calculated arrogance highlights a terrifying reality. The killers were not criminal masterminds. They were brutal opportunists, benefiting from a staggering stroke of luck. The real accomplice to the Keddie Cabin murders was the initial investigation's systemic incompetence. The perpetrators swung the hammer, but law enforcement's chaotic response effectively wiped the fingerprints off the handle. Today, Cabin 28 no longer stands. It was demolished, erased from the Sierra Nevada foothills as if removing the structure could cleanse the soil of its violent history. But the ghosts of April 1981 refused to be silenced. The forensic data, though fragmented and abused, still exists in the archives. It remains a permanent record of a night when human cruelty went unchecked. The missing claw hammer remains out there. The red thread of this case does not lead to a neat resolution. It leads into the dark heart of a compromised crime scene, forcing us to confront the terrifying fragility of truth. We study the Keddie murders not to marvel at the mystery, but to dissect the failure. It stands as a grim monument to the absolute necessity of forensic rigor. When the perimeter falls, the killers do not just escape the law, they escape history entirely, leaving behind nothing but the echoes of a missing tool in the dark. The investigative gap regarding evidence handling in Plumas County transformed a brutal, solvable triple homicide into an enduring nightmare. The blood soaked into the floorboards of Cabin 28 has long since dried, but the questions remain as fresh as the morning air in 1981. Until the missing hammer is found, the Keddie case will forever remain an open wound.